From a Friar's Cell, Part 3. Chapter 5. The Lambeth Conference. Throughout the month of July, and until August 8th, the bishops in communion with the sees of Canterbury and York will sit in conference at Lambeth. The war, which has given the English-speaking peoples, for good or evil, a paramount influence in international politics, will therefore add a more than transient spiritual weight to a conference of bishops discussing the world problems in the English tongue. Even without the gravity which comes to it from the world's greatest war, this Lambeth Conference has a significance almost unique. It is no mere local council. Its bishops are from all parts of the world. His Grace, the Archbishop of Canterbury, in asking Dr. F.B. Meyer, the President of the Free Church Council, for the prayers and sympathy of the free churches, could say, "The Lambeth Conference will, so far as we can at present tell, include 107 bishops from the dioceses in the dominions and the mission field, 72 bishops from the United States of America, and about 100 bishops whose work lies in the British Isles." Thus the Council of English-speaking bishops, who will foregather amidst the historic memories of Lambeth, will number about 300. It would be idle and perhaps sinful to ignore this unique event. Indeed, we can ask when, since the primitive times, has there been held such a provincial council speaking a modern language? Only some 300 bishops assembled in ecumenical council at Nicaea to define the Holy Spirit. Only some 200 bishops assembled in ecumenical council at Ephesus to define the Theotokos. Moreover, although these bishops of the Lambeth Conference are to some extent of the same race, yet in this they are not unlike the fathers of the first 4 ecumenical councils. But if, on one hand, they are racially a little more than one kindred than these fathers of the first 4 ecumenical councils, on the other hand they come from dioceses comparable in ecumenical extent only with the Vatican Council, which for the first time in the history of the Catholic Church drew its members from all the quarters of the earth. In numbers and in ecclesiastical influence, therefore, the Lambeth Conference of 1920 will be equaled by few, if any, of the non-ecumenical councils, either in the Eastern or the Western Church. This phenomenon is all the more impressive because it is less than a century ago since the Church of England seemed dead or dying, even to the eyes of its own children. With the passage of the Reform Bill of 1830, and the disestablishment of the Church of Ireland in 1833, such acute minds as Hurrell Froude, Keble, and Newman thought that the Church of England was doomed to death. It was almost in a forlorn hope of raising their mother from death to life that these men in any Oxford common room began a movement worthy of the home of lost causes. The cause of the English Church seemed to some still more hopeless when Newman, who was the philosopher of the Tractarian movement, left the church of his baptism, as a seaman leaves a foundering ship. Until Newman's genius and subtlety had written the Via Media, the Church of England had lacked a philosophy of this life. Yet the thinker who had begotten this philosophy came to look upon it not as a vital thinking, but as a paper logic doomed to sterility and death. He was, therefore, speaking not his own thoughts, but the thoughts of many of his brethren of the English Church, when his last Anglican sermon at Littlemore, he thus apostrophized their common mother. O my mother, whence is this unto thee, that thou hast good things poured out upon thee, and canst not keep them, and bearest children, yet darest not own them? Why hast thou not the skill to use their services, nor the heart to rejoice in their love? How is it that whatever is generous in purpose and tender or deep in devotion, thy flower and thy promise falls from thy bosom and finds no place within thine arms? Who hath put this note upon thee, to have a miscarrying womb and dry breasts? And what wilt thou do in the end thereof? The group of prelates gathered together in the little college chapel at Oscott were touched to enthusiasm by this fugitive from the other camp, who spoke to them of a second spring. He had the dramatic instinct to see what he had the artistic power to express in words of almost magic eloquence. And so that high company moves on into the holy place, and there with august rite and awful sacrifice inaugurates the great act which brought it hither. What is that act? It is the first synod of a new hierarchy. It is the resurrection of the Church. The course of events has, for the moment, somewhat dramatically belied both these dramatic forecasts. The contrary of the expectations of even the wise, the Church of England has not met an early death. Indeed, it may even be said to have risen from death to life. Largely through the influence of the genius and senior who prophesied its dissolution, it has gone on to a fuller life than it had since the struggles of the 16th century. Not even the men who did not follow Newman's Romewards in 1845 would have prophesied that in less than 80 years, some 300 bishops in full communion with Canterbury and York would meet at Lambeth to discuss the spiritual destinies of the two great states who now control not only London and Washington, but Alexandria, Jerusalem, Constantinople. Indeed, the very words which Newman used in Oscott College Chapel to hearten the First Provincial Synod of Westminster may well find an application in the present state of those in communion with the sees of Canterbury and York. It is the resurrection of the Church. This resurrection had sprung from such resolve, has encountered such opposition, has been fraught with such surprises, and we may truly say, has been crowned with such success, that it is one of the chief phenomena of the 19th and 20th centuries. That a movement beginning in the common room of one of the lesser Oxford colleges should have taken less than a century to become almost a worldwide force is a spiritual fact of the first importance, even to those who are not glad of the fact. Its importance to us, Roman Catholics, is not merely that it has given us 2 cardinals, many bishops, thousands of converts, and a spiritual impulse which can be found even in the vestments the priest wears at the altar, and the hymns our people sing in their homes. The things it has done within our fold, though so great, and indeed unique, are almost unimportant when compared with the things that has done at home in its own fold. In towns where nonconformity was supreme, the High Church, or as it now calls itself, the Catholic party have, by years of hard work, succeeded in capturing the first position amongst the citizens. Nor is it true to think that This position of influence is found merely amongst the well-to-do. The Church of England has bred and reared hundreds of Dawlings, men who have lived amongst the poor as poor men themselves. Again, their restoration of liturgical worship has examples, even for us within the fold of St. Peter. Their churches are often models of liturgical exactness. To the present writer, the history of their confraternity of the Blessed Sacrament is characteristic and challenging. Before the Codex Juris Canonici ordered local ordinaries to erect the confraternity of the Blessed Sacrament in every parish, the Catholic party within the Church of England had established their confraternity throughout the length and breadth of the land. Indeed, even now, 3 years after the publication of the Codex, the confraternities established by our semperant brethren far outstrip ours in number and organization. In hundreds of churches, these confraternities meet at least once a month to say as their office the vespers for the feast of Corpus Christi. It may, therefore, be said that since the day when J.H. Newman, in parting with his friends at Littlemore, forecast the approaching death of the Church of England, death that has been at least delayed. Indeed, all, or almost all, the official steps taken since that day have been towards that full Catholic life, which we, in the fold of St. Peter, have as our birthright. This has been said by the Reverend Spencer Jones in his book, The Counter-Reformation. So it has come to pass that the movement has realized for itself a constitutional course, beginning where all wholesome movements for reform should begin with the witness of individuals among the inferior clergy who had to suffer persecution, and in many instances imprisonment for truth's sake, and finding its way gradually to a seat of authority and center. And thus, unlike the heretical teaching under Elizabeth and Edward VI, the Catholic doctrine, which may have to be tolerated for a time before it can triumph, has won its way so far in spite of force and not by means of it. Over and against the resurrection of the Church of England from the dead, we have to set the undeniable life, if not growth, of the Catholic body in communion with the See of Rome. This life we would be the last to deny, and this growth we are willing and even anxious to believe. But are the facts on the side of this belief? We are not sure that they are. Certainly, if we take a general view of the present position of Catholics in England and Wales, we find that in a population of 36,203,253 as of 1911, there are 1,898,843, 1920 Catholics. Catholics are again 1 in every 20 of the population. Again, to take a concrete example suggested by the Second Spring, in the great city which now contains the chapel of the First Provincial Synod of Westminster, the estimated Catholic population is less than 35,000 out of a population of 1,000,000, or 1 in every 28 of citizens of Birmingham. Yet it would be difficult to find a center of Catholicity more effectively organized than Birmingham. It has been led by the most efficient and apostolic bishops. John Henry Cardinal Newman lived and worked in it for years. It boasts of a diocesan seminary, perhaps the most historic in England. It has had a brand of diocesan clergy second to none. Yet it would be impossible to say whether its growth has been greater than that section of the Church of England which calls itself Catholic. All these facts we must face as facts if we are to base conclusions and policy on the rock of truth. Moreover, they give to the Lambeth Conference an importance which is not to be dismissed by mere controversial acerbities. But our readers may ask, what is the significance of these facts? Are they signs of victory or of defeat? Are they towards hope or despair? We know not. God knows. Let us set down the grounds of hope. 1. It is evident that the forward movement among those in communion with the sees of Canterbury and York is a Rome-ward movement, or if that word Rome is still too pungent to be borne, the movement is towards regaining under a sense of continuity all those truths, all that sacramental life, all that ecclesiastical community and the fellowship with Christian churches, which, in the words of Reverend Spencer Jones, were torn from the Church of England by an organized conspiracy of fraud and force. 2. This movement has left its mark even in the official statements of the Lambeth conferences. They have been spoken on both sides of our separation, only too many words which it is well to forget, and only too few it is well to remember. Even if previous Lambeth conferences have not always said the word which heals, the last Lambeth conference, in 1908, has said a word which at least cannot rankle. In the report presented to the full conference by the Committee on Reunion and Intercommunion, these wise words found a place. They, the committee, desire to place upon record their conviction that no projects of union can ever be regarded as satisfactory which deliberately leave out the churches of the Latin Communion. This pronouncement is in the spirit of the wise words written by Professor E.A. Freeman. The Church of England is the daughter of the Church of Rome. She is so perhaps more than any other church in Europe. But the Lambeth Conference of 1908 had to look beyond the mere events of the previous 12 years in order to forget the bull Apostolicae Curae. Under the hunger and thirst for a reunion, such generosity of forgetfulness does not make for despair. 3. If this last Lambeth Conference was generous in its admission towards its mother church, it has been met by admissions no less generous. When events made it necessary to set an organized hierarchy over the Roman Catholics of this country, the Church of Rome, with singular delicacy, did not set its bishops and archbishops in the historic sees of Canterbury, York, and the rest. The significance of this delicacy of the successors of St. Gregory cannot at once fully be seen. But if ever a day of reconciliation comes about, this act of the popes in leaving unchallenged the sees first created by St. Gregory the Great may allow us to see a Cardinal Archbishop of Canterbury singing High Mass in Westminster Cathedral. 4. The Ecclesia Anglicana may well expect that its desires for reunion will be met by Rome's traditional breadth of toleration. Of this toleration we have a new proof in the Codex Juris Canonici. Although this body of laws have been the elaboration of centuries, and it is more important than Magna Carta, yet its opening canon is Licet et codis juris canonici ecclesiae quoque orientalis disciplina saepi refertur. ipsi tamen unam respisit Latinam ecclesiam neque Orientalism obligat. Although the Code of Canon Law, the discipline of the Eastern Church, is often mentioned, yet it regards only the Latin Church and does not oblige the Eastern Church. Now this Eastern Church, which is of such concern for Rome that it exempts it from the normal legislation, hardly numbers 100 bishops, whose sees are among nations of little international importance. On the other hand, the bishops in communion with Canterbury and York number over 300, and belong for the moment to the two most powerful nations left by the war. 5. Again, it is often felt that the supremacy of the See of Rome has dwarfed the authority of bishops, but it is the See of Rome at Trent and Vatican, and in the Codex which officially exalts bishops by calling them successors of the apostles. Pope Leo XIII, in the encyclical Satis Cognitium, officially denies that these successors of the apostles are merely vicars of the Roman pontiff. In doctrine, no other church has been so exalted the bishops, and in fact the bishops in communion with the apostolic see are given more honor and authority than any other bishops in the world. 6. As the churches in communion with Rome and those in communion with Canterbury and York are being slowly emancipated from the secular and royal pressure, they begin to feel that the separation between them has not been mainly of their own making. The issues, at least in this country, have to be obscured by our fathers, politically identifying the crown rights of Christ with the royal pretension of a dynasty. The faith of England has been largely lost in a dynastic quarrel between the House of Tudor and the House of Stuart. The recognition of this fact may be the first step towards its undoing. 7. Much of the spirit that animates the successors of St. Peter is to be found in the noble words uttered by the Right Reverend W.R. Brownlow, Bishop of Clifton, 1896. Of one thing our Anglican friends may be assured: no jealousy or selfish feeling of personal dignity on the part of the Catholic hierarchy will ever stand in the way of reunion. Speaking for myself, I can say from my heart that I should be too thankful to petition the Holy Father for permission to resign my see, to take down my canopy and throne from the pro-cathedral, and lay my episcopal crozier at the feet of a Catholic bishop, Bristol. We may be asked, what will be the outcome of the present relation between the Mother See of Rome and her beloved child Canterbury? Again we say, a little sadly, we do not know. No quarrels are more enduring or more deadly than those between next of kin. The issue between mother and child depends wholly upon human wills, but when human wills are set resolutely upon God's truth and God's will, it is hard to find therein any other signs than those that look towards hope. Chapter 6. Canterbury and Rome. A deep sense of responsibility urged us to write in our July issue some of the thoughts that filled our son on the eve of the Lambeth Conference. We were of those who could see, and even profess to see, a unique event in the assembly of 250 bishops in communion with the sees of Canterbury and York. These bishops, belonging to the two great English-speaking nations, could not discuss after-war problems in the spiritual sphere without wielding a power for good, which, like every other power, might be turned to evil even when used in good intent. It was part of their disarming truthfulness, frankly, to confess that they had no mandate, even from their own church, to say the last word on any subject of spiritual reconstruction. This profession of self-diffidence did not discredit them in our eyes. Rather, did it put them apart from that all too numerous group of spiritual reconstructionists whose self-confidence is their chief power for evil. We were therefore ready to listen to whatever issued from the counsels of a group of men whose self-diffidence recalled the prophetic words, "I am not the Christ." Our readiness to listen was not disappointed. As the result of deliberations lasting some 5 weeks, the assembled bishops issued 1. An encyclical letter, 2. An appeal to all Christian people on reunion, 3. Resolutions, 80 in number, 4. Reports of committees. We do not think we are exaggerating the result of these deliberations by looking upon them as one of the most important steps towards social reconstruction taken since the outbreak of the Great War. In this we are probably re-echoing the quiet suffrage of the public. Although the report is a volume of 160 pages, costing 2 shillings, yet the first edition of 15,000 was entirely sold out within 7 days. This great sale, which is probably unprecedented, is mainly due to the question of reunion, which the report placed in such prominence. To quote an unbiased witness, the appeal to all Christian people, which was issued a few days ago by the Lambeth Conference, has received a most cordial welcome, very various quarters. Churchmen of all schools of thought have expressed their gratitude for this plea for the union of Christendom, and some of the most preeminent free churchmen to have stated their appreciation in the most emphatic way. Daily Telegraph, August 28th. The resolutions and committee reports deal with Christianity and international relations, the church and industrial problems, the development of provinces, missionary problems, position of women, problems of marriage, spiritualism, Christian science and theosophy, reunion. As it went with the question of reunion that we are all concerned, we will set down the words of the encyclical letter. God has called into being a fellowship of men, his church, and sent his Holy Spirit to abide therein, that by the prevailing attraction of that one Spirit, he, the one God and Father of all, may win over the whole human family to that fellowship in himself, by which alone it can attain to the fullness of life. The weakness of the church in the world of today is not surprising when we consider how the bands of its own fellowship are loosened and broken. The truth of this had been slowly working into the consciousness of Christians before the war, but the war and its horrors, waged as it was between the so-called Christian nations, drove home the truth with the shock of a sudden awakening. Men in all communions began to think of the reunion of Christendom not as a laudable ambition or a beautiful dream, but as an imperative necessity. The great wind was blowing over the whole earth. Such were the conditions of the time at which our conference met. All realized that the subject of reunion was our most important subject. The bishops brought with them into the conference very various preconceptions, different traditions, different estimates of history, different experiences in the present, different opinions on current proposals, seemed almost to preclude the hope of reaching any common mind. The subject of reunion was entrusted to the largest committee ever appointed in the Lambeth Conference. As their work proceeded, the members of it felt they were being drawn by a power greater than themselves to a general agreement. Their conclusions were accepted by the conference under the same sense of a compelling influence. The decision of the conference was reached with a unanimity all but complete. It is embodied in our appeal to all Christian people. 1. All realize that the subject of reunion was our most important subject. This is a unique spiritual phenomena of the 20th century. It has been forced upon the consciousness of Christianity by the visible failure of Christians to stem religious indifference. To a Roman Catholic who asked a clever, successful, and upright doctor, "Why have you no religion?" the reply was, "I am a very busy man. I will choose my religion when the clergy have agreed with which is the true religion." Ministers of religion are slowly awakening to two facts. A. Christianity is losing to practical indifference. B. The chief factor in this loss is the disunion of Christians and especially of the ministers of religion. It is consoling to know that no one is more conscious of these two factors than are these same ministers of religion. Whilst it is mainly due to them that the number of Christians is as large as it is also mainly due to them that the number of Christians is as small as it is, and gradually becoming relatively smaller. 3. It is still more consoling to realize that the movement towards the church reunion is a largely fostered and furthered by ministers of religion. No doubt there is a very helpful backing from the laity, and even a dangerous backing here and there from the politicians. But the movement, whether among English churchmen or free churchmen, has sprung from the ranks of those ministers of religion who have come to feel in the present crisis of religion that unity alone is strength. 4. These 250 bishops, summoned from all parts of the world and assembled at Lambeth, were at one with their fellow ministers of religion in seeing the need for religious reunion. Indeed, they put reunion on the forefront of their deliberations, looking upon it rightly as their most important subject. They dealt with it more determinedly than it had ever been dealt with by them before. They appointed the largest committee ever appointed by a Lambeth conference. The report on reunion was passed with a unanimity all but complete. The Bishop of Exeter tells us that one of the 250 bishops, only 3 were unable to vote for the resolution. Church Times, August 20th. 2. The causes of the disunion of Christendom are set down with frank humility in the appeal. The causes of division lie deep in the past and are by no means simple or wholly blameworthy, yet none can doubt that self-will, ambition, and a lack of charity amongst Christians have been the principal factors in the mingled process, and that these, together with blindness to the sin of disunion, are still mainly responsible for the breaches of Christendom. We acknowledge this condition of broken fellowship to the contrary of God's will, and we desire frankly to confess our share in the guilt of thus crippling the body of Christ and hindering the activity of his Spirit. 1. Something may assuredly be wanting to this statement as a formula of faith, but nothing is wanting to it as a formula of repentance. It may not meet all the theological doctrine of the indefectibility of the Church, but it is a humble denial of the impeccability of churchmen. 2. Bishops like his Lordship of Zanzibar gave this frank acknowledgment an expression still more frank. He writes, "The bishops are, I take it, prepared to wash the feet of their fellow Christians, to humble themselves before them, if by any means they may be counted worthy to serve them. For myself, I am thankful for the bishop's utterance. It has lifted us to a whole new level. We are bidden, in effect, exorcise the spirit of sectarianism from all our communions. We are bidden, in effect, exorcise the spirit of sectarianism from all our communications, to lift up our eyes to the vision of the universal church, and to humble ourselves at one another's feet." Church Times, August 20th. Such sentiments have not come to the heart of man from the mere mind of man. A great wind has blown them hither from the mind and heart of God. If we are not within sight of the city of peace, our faces are set eastwards towards its gates. 3. We of the Roman Catholic Church, that is, the Ecclesia Latina, or the Ecclesia Orientalis, Codex Juris Canonici, will not allow our separated brethren to accept all the sin of disunion. Long before the disunion came, our saints and prophets saw it coming. They denounced it as a crime, but they denounced still more the crimes of those even in the highest quarters which brought it into being. Even today our people are taught to look upon the upheaval of the 16th century as an effect of their own sins. Gradually a regrettable worldliness manifested itself in many high ecclesiastics. Their chief object, example, to guide man to his eternal goal, claimed too seldom their attention, and the worldly activities became in too many cases the chief interest. Political power, material possessions, earthly interests of various kinds were only too often the chief aim of many of the higher clergy. Pastoral solicitude, the specifically religious and ecclesiastical aim, fell largely into the background, notwithstanding various spirited and successful attempts to rectify the existing evils. Closely connected with the above were various abuses in the lives of the clergy and the people. In the papal curia, political interests and a worldly life were often prominent. Many bishops and abbots bore themselves as secular rulers rather than as servants of the Church. The scientific and ascetic training of the clergy left much to be desired, the moral standard of many being very low, and the practice of celibacy not everywhere observed. If we have quoted this passage from such a representative and widely read work as the Catholic Encyclopedia, it is not for its authoritativeness or for our agreement with its findings. Indeed, we should not be surprised if the writer of the article has painted his picture in colors too dark for truth. But for that reason, the quotation is irrefutable as an indication of the Church's present desire to acknowledge its share in the responsibility of disunion. This makes towards hope. When two parties to a quarrel cannot outdo each other in accepting blame at the end of the quarrel is in sight. 3. Some noteworthy steps towards reunion are taken in the following weighty statements. Terms of reunion must no longer be judged by the success with which they meet the claims and preserve the positions of two or more uniting communions, but by their correspondence to the common ideal of the Church as God would have had it. So long as there is vital connection with the head, there is positive value in the differentiation of the members. But we are convinced that this ideal cannot be fulfilled if these groups are content to remain in separation from one another, or be joined together only in some vague federation. Their value for the fullness of Christian life, truth, and witness can only be realized if they are united in the fellowships of one visible society, whose members are bound together by the ties of a common faith, common sacraments, and a common ministry. It was towards this ideal of a united and truly Catholic Church that we must all set our minds. Encyclical letter. We believe that it is God's purpose to manifest his fellowship, so far as the world is concerned, in an outward, visible, and united society, hold the one faith, having its own recognized officers, using God-given means of grace, and inspiring all its members to the worldwide service of the kingdom of God. That is what we mean by the Catholic Church. To this end, we who send forth this appeal would say that the authorities of other communions should so desire. We are persuaded that, in terms of union having been otherwise satisfactorily adjusted, bishops and clergy of our communion would willingly accept from these authorities a form of commission or recognition which would commend our ministry to their congregations. Appeals to all Christian people. Should the Church of Rome at any time desire to discuss conditions of reunion, we shall be ready to welcome such discussions. Report on Reunion, Part 3. 1. Again, let us frankly own that as professions of faith these statements may not have been drawn up with theological accuracy, but even their promulgators have not wished to make them professions of faith. In a truer sense they are professions of charity. We are not so zeal-blinded as to see in them the dawn of reunion, but they are the most authentic promise of dawn that has yet appeared in the dark night legacied to us by the 16th century. 2. There is a clear, definite enunciation of the state of the visible church. This is not to deny, indeed it may even demand, the necessity of an invisible church, since it is not outward, visible professions of faith, but the inner, hidden life of charity that saves the human soul by uniting it to the soul of the church. Visible professions of faith, but the inner, hidden life of charity that saves the human soul by uniting it to the soul of the church. The visible church is one in faith, in sacraments, in ministry. In the report of the committee, it is said, "It is of first importance, in order to remove Oriental misconceptions, to make it clear from our formularies that we regard ordination as a conferring grace, and not only as a mere setting apart to a ecclesiastical office." The Church Times has some helpful words on this attitude of the conference. In a leading article on August 27th, it says, "The point upon which most stress has been laid is the patent conviction that the bishops that nothing can be done until nonconformists are willing to submit to episcopal ordination." They have in view not only the reunion with the Protestants, but reunion with Rome and the East, neither of which would hear of reunion on any other basis. Some nonconformists seem to assume that the sacramental theory of the ministry has been abandoned by the bishops. Of course, this is not so. Then follows the passage requoted from the report. If Rome or the East have doubts of our ordination, we will submit to an ordination which will remove those doubts. We who live through the distressing period before and after the apostolicae curae, saw such evidence of the human emotions engendered on both sides that we well nigh despaired of a reconciliation. But the bishops gathered under the shadow of St. Anselm and St. Thomas at Lambeth, and had made despair an act of disloyalty to him who rules the heart. 4. This willingness to serve reunion, even by submitting to reordination, shows a disposition of such readiness that we can hardly overrate the following significant words. Should the Church of Rome at any time desire to discuss conditions of reunion, we shall be ready to welcome such discussions. It is nearly 300 years since words such as these passed between the Mother Church and its beloved daughter church. They are too fateful, perhaps too official, to be fitly dealt with by a private theologian. They are of the nature of an invitation to proclaim an armistice with a view to the final peace conference. The shepherd who guides his flock where Peter laid down his life for the sheep will not hear this voice of the English without feeling his shepherd heart move to its depths. Already the court of St. James has entered into official relations with the court of St. Peter's. God grant it may be but a symbol significant and effective of the another recollection, which will mean the kiss of peace between Rome and Canterbury.